It was not love that brought Clara Whitmore to the dusty edge of the world. It was fear, fear what chased her, and a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone out here was waiting to love her anyway. The train groaned to a stop, like it didn't want to be there. It let out one final puff of steam, long and loud, like a sigh. Clara Whitmore stepped off the last car, her boots hitting the dirt of Black Hollow with a soft thud. She didn't own much, a small suitcase, a letter, and a heart too full of worry. Her dress, once the color of spring, now wore the dust of miles traveled, and her gloves were too thin to hide the way her hands trembled. The town was quiet, too quiet for a place where lives were meant to begin. She looked around, searching the platform, the road beyond, the windows above the shops. No one waited for her, not even a curious child, not even a stray dog. Just wind and dust and the slow swing of a broken sign that read Black Hollow Station. He was supposed to be here. Levi McCallister. That was the name written in looping. Careful ink on the letter she kept close to her chest. She had read it so many times. She could still hear his voice in her mind, even though she had never heard it aloud. I don't need a fancy woman. I just need someone kind. I'll meet you off the train at noon. You'll know me by the red scarf. No red scarf. No man. No smile. Just silence. Clara stood there, her suitcase growing heavy in her hand. She told herself not to cry. Not again. But her throat was tight and her eyes stung. She had given up everything. Her name, her home, her chance to ever go back. All for a man who wasn't even here. She turned slowly, her heart sinking. The station master, an older man with gray beard and sleepy eyes, stepped out of the office and saw her standing alone. He tipped his hat, polite but distracted. "You the mail-order bride?" he asked, as if it was the same as asking if she liked the weather. Clara nodded. He squinted at her. "McCallister ain't been seen since yesterday morning. Reckon he'll turn up." That was it. No concern. No explanation. Just a shrug and a slow walk back to his chair. Clara felt her heart twist in her chest. Was he hurt? Had he changed his mind? Was this some kind of cruel joke? She didn't know where to go. She didn't even know who to ask. The wind tugged at her dress. A group of boys ran past, laughing, not noticing her. A dog barked in the distance. She looked at the sky. Clouds were gathering, low and gray and fast. She took a deep breath. She would not break. Not here. Not yet. Across the street was a wooden sign that read Grimsby's Boarding House. The curtains in the window moved, and for a second, Clara thought someone was watching her. But the movement stopped just as quickly. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward it. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. But her mind was racing. What had happened to Levi McCallister? Why had no one come for her? And why had that warning in her gut gotten louder the moment she stepped off that train? The bell above the boarding house door jingled as she stepped inside. It smelled like with smoke, old lace, and something baking in the kitchen. A woman in her 60s, with gray hair in a bun and small spectacles on her nose, looked up from a book. "Miss Whitmore, I suppose," the woman said, setting her book down gently. Clara blinked. "Yes, I'm looking for Mr. McCallister." The woman pressed her lips together. "Aren't we all?" she said softly. Then she nodded to the stairs. "Room at the end of the hall. You look like you could use a rest." Clara didn't know what to say. Her heart was already beating too fast to speak. The room was small but clean. A simple bed, a washstand, a chair, nothing more. She set her suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. The clock on the table ticked. Every tick sounded like it was counting something. Counting time. Counting down. And somewhere deep inside her, Clara knew something was wrong. Something had already happened. And if she didn't find out what before midnight, it might be too late. Clara didn't sleep much that night. The room at the boarding house was quiet, but her mind was anything but. Thoughts came fast, like horses running in all directions. She thought of the letter Levi had written. She thought of his words, gentle and honest, and wondered what kind of man wrote a letter like that, then failed to show up She sat by the window long after the oil lamp had burned low, staring out at the town of Black Hollow. It was so still, no one on the streets, just the wind, whispering secrets she didn't understand yet. As the morning light slid through the curtains, Clara washed her face in the basin and dressed in silence. Her dress was wrinkled now, her eyes tired, but something in her had changed. She was no longer just a woman waiting. She was going to find out what had happened. Downstairs, the smell of biscuits drifted from the kitchen. Mrs. Grimsby was already there, setting plates at the table. "You sleep at all?" she asked, not looking up. "Some," Clara lied. Mrs. Grimsby handed her a plate. "You need to eat. Worry makes folks forget to take care of themselves. Don't let it win." Clara gave a small nod and sat down. After a few bites, she asked, "Do you know Mr. McCallister well?" Mrs. Grimsby paused, holding a cup of tea midair. "Well enough to know he ain't the kind to run off on a promise." Clara looked at her. "Then where is he?" The old woman's eyes were sharp, even behind those round glasses. "That's the question, isn't it?" They ate in silence after that. But when Clara stood to leave, Mrs. Grimsby pressed a small folded note into her hand. "Someone slipped this under my door last night. No name." Clara opened it. One sentence, written in rough handwriting. "He asked too many questions. So did the last one." Her fingers went cold. She looked up, but Mrs. Grimsby was already back in the kitchen, pretending she hadn't just handed over something that made Clara's heart thump hard in her chest. Clara stepped out into the morning sun, shielding her eyes. The town was slowly waking. The blacksmith pounded metal in the distance. A few women swept their porches, but most people avoided her eyes. She had never felt so alone in a crowd. She went to Levi's last known place, his saloon. It wasn't the kind of place women usually entered, but Clara didn't care. She needed answers. The saloon doors creaked as she pushed them open. Inside it smelled of smoke, dust, and old wood. The room was dim, even in daylight. A man behind the bar looked up, surprised. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm looking for Levi McCallister." "I'm his." She paused. "What was she, really?" "I was supposed to marry him." The man blinked. "Well, that's a first." He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned forward. "Name's Tom. I work here. Levi ain't been around since yesterday morning. Said he was heading out to check something near the North Ridge. Didn't say much else." Clara's hands tightened on her purse. "Did anyone go with him?" Tom shrugged. "Don't think so. But I wouldn't know. Levi kept things close." She looked around the saloon. One wall had maps pinned to it. Another had a safe built into the floor. Everything felt half lived in, like someone left in a hurry. She stepped toward the back room. "Mind if I look?" Tom hesitated. "Ain't my place to say no, I guess." Inside the back room, Clara found papers on the desk, all spread out like Levi had been studying something important. Some were letters, some were maps, and some looked like legal papers. Mining claims. Land deeds. She picked up one map. It had red excess drawn over certain areas outside of town. Some were circled. One corner had a note. Missing people. 3 and 2 months. All last seen near the ridge. Clara's stomach dropped. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But Levi had been following something. Something big. And dangerous. She tucked the map into her bag. Before she could leave, she heard voices outside. Then the door swung open. The sheriff stepped in. He was tall, with eyes like storm clouds and a badge that shone too bright for a man who never smiled. "Morning," he said, voice cold. "I hear you're looking into things you don't understand." Clara faced him. "I'm looking for Levi McCallister." "He's missing." The sheriff nodded slowly. "And maybe he wants to be." Clara didn't flinch. "He's not the kind of man to run." The sheriff tilted his head. "Sometimes folks disappear because they don't know when to stop asking questions. That's advice, Miss Whitmore, not a threat." He left without another word. Clara stood there, heart racing, the silence he left behind colder than any winter wind. Something was very wrong in Black Hollow. And if Levi really had uncovered something dangerous, Then someone didn't want her asking questions, either. But Clara wasn't leaving. Not now. Not until she found him. The sheriff's words followed Clara down the street, like a shadow. That's advice, Miss Whitmore, not a threat. But it felt like both. She walked faster, gripping her bag tighter, the edges of Levi's map pressing into her side. She didn't know where to go yet, only that she couldn't stay still. Standing still felt too close to giving up. When she reached the edge of town, she stopped beside a dry fountain near the chapel. She sat on the stone edge and let her shoulders drop. A bird sang somewhere above, too bright and sweet for a place so heavy with silence. You look like a girl with a fire under her feet, a voice said behind her. Clara turned. A woman in a faded yellow dress stood nearby, carrying a basket of bread and eggs. Her hair was gray like Mrs. Grimsby's, but her eyes were sharp, like she saw more than people wanted her to. "You're the bride, aren't you?" the woman asked. Clara nodded. The woman sat beside her and set the basket down. "I'm Mabel Carter. I work at the chapel. Sometimes help out at the clinic, when Doc's too drunk to hold his needle straight." Clara blinked. "Is the sheriff always so cold?" Mabel snorted. "Amos Greeley? That man's been more shadow than soul since the mines came in. Doesn't ask questions. Doesn't like it when others do." Clara hesitated. "Do you know anything about Levi McCallister?" Mabel picked up a piece of bread and broke it. He was asking around, talking to folks about land deeds, about miners who never came back. Said things weren't right. Said people were disappearing. Clara leaned in. "And now he's gone too." Mabel nodded. "And you came all this way thinking you were marrying a man. But maybe you're bearing a mystery." The wind picked up. Clara hugged her arms around her. "I think someone hurt him," she said softly, "or is trying to hide something he found out." Mabel looked over at her. "Then you're already in it. Sugar, whether you want to be or not." She stood and handed Clara a fresh roll. "You need anything, come to me. I ain't afraid of the dark. But don't go trusting everyone in this town. Some smiles hide poison." Clara thanked her, holding the warm bread with both hands like it was a gift. As Mabel walked away, Clara looked around the town again. Really looked this time. There were people watching. Not openly. Not kindly. From behind curtains. Around corners. She stood and walked back toward the boarding house, trying to look casual. When she reached her room, she locked the door behind her and pulled out the map. 3 red XS. All near the North Ridge. She spread out the papers. She didn't know much about mining or land, but she did know patterns. Levi had been tracking something, and the sheriff didn't want it found. And there, tucked between 2 folded maps, was another note. "Stop looking or you'll disappear too, just like the others. Midnight comes fast." Clara stared at the words. That was the second warning. The second time someone tried to scare her away. But this wasn't Boston. She wasn't the helpless girl who left in shame. Not anymore. She took a deep breath, stood tall, and folded the map again. Her hands still shook, but now they shook with something different. Not fear. Fight. If she had to search the entire ridge herself, she would. If she had to drag the truth out of this town by its roots, she would. Because if Levi was still alive, he needed her. And if he wasn't, she would make sure his story didn't vanish like the others. Clara was halfway to the ridge when she heard the name she'd been running from. Miss Whitmore. A man's voice called behind her, smooth as polished stone. Or should I say, Miss Langford. Her feet stopped cold. She turned slowly. There, standing beside a black horse, was a tall man in a gray coat and a crooked smile. Nathan Pike, the man who knew what Boston whispered behind her back. The one who knew what she'd done to escape shame, even if she hadn't truly done anything wrong. "I heard you were looking for love out west," Nathan said, brushing dust from his sleeve. "Didn't expect to find you in a place like this. Alone." Clara's mouth went dry. "Why are you here?" He stepped closer. "Same reason I always am. Business. And you?" "Running from ghosts again." Clara didn't answer. She didn't have to. Nathan always had a way of twisting silence into a threat. "I suggest you leave with me," he said quietly. There's still time to disappear before things get worse. Clara stared at him. His coat was too clean. His boots didn't match the dirt of the town. He didn't belong here, not naturally. And that made her wonder if he'd come on his own, or if someone had sent him. "No," she said, standing straight. "I came here to find the truth, and I'm not leaving without it." Nathan smirked. "Then I'll wait. You'll change your mind. You always do." He tipped his hat and walked away. But this time, Clara didn't flinch. He was a past. She was facing the future now, no matter how dark it looked. Clara stood on the trail just beyond town, the wind tugging at her sleeves. The trees ahead were thin and quiet, and the ridge loomed in the distance like a sleeping giant. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something else. She didn't know what waited out there, only that Levi had gone this way and never come back. She stepped forward. The woods were colder here. The light didn't touch the ground the same way. Everything was still. Then she saw it. Caught on a low branch was a scrap of red cloth, bright against the gray and brown. Her breath caught in her throat. Levi's red scarf. She reached for it with shaking fingers. The fabric was torn, but real. Not a dream. Not something planted. He had been here. She turned slowly, holding the scarf in her hand, and froze. A figure stood at the tree line. Tall, broad, shadowed. She couldn't see his face. "Levi," she called out. No answer. The figure stepped forward just enough for light to catch the edge of his coat, but not his eyes. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the trees. Clara ran after him, heart racing. But when she reached the spot, there was no one, just the sound of leaves and far-off thunder. He had disappeared. But he was alive. She felt it, and someone was leading her toward him, or away. Clara's boots slipped on the damp earth as she pushed through the trees, her breath fast, her heart faster. The red scarf was still in her hand, fingers clenched tight around it. It was her only proof that Levi had been here, and that someone wanted her to find it. But now the woods were too quiet. No birds, no wind, just silence, thick like fog. She slowed down. Something was wrong. Then she saw it, tracks in the dirt, heavy boot prints, going deeper into the woods. Not one set, two, one wide and fresh, the other dragging. She knelt down. The second trail looked like someone had been pulled. Her stomach turned. Clara followed the path until it ended at an old shack, half sunken into the earth. The door hung crooked on its hinges. A rope dangled from a hook outside, swaying like someone had just passed. She stepped closer. Then she heard it. A voice. Muffled. Inside. Her fingers wrapped around the doorknob. But before she could turn it, she felt something cold press against her back. A gun. "Looking for someone?" a man said behind her. Clara didn't move. I'm not leaving without him," she said. The man chuckled. It wasn't a kind sound. "That's the problem, Miss Whitmore. You weren't supposed to come at all." He shoved her forward, into the shack. Inside it was dark. Dust floated in the thin light from a crack in the wall. She looked around quickly. Chains, an old table, a lantern, and blood. But no Levi. He wasn't here. This was something else. A warning. The man stepped in and shut the door behind him. Clara backed away, her hands shaking. But even through the fear, her mind was working. He didn't shoot her. Not yet. That meant something. She looked up at him, his face hidden under a wide hat, eyes shaded. "You're not the one in charge," she said quietly. "You're just the hand, not the mind." That made him pause. "You're smarter than you look," he muttered. Clara forced herself to stand taller. "Let me go, or the whole town will know you're part of this." His grin faded. "You've got until midnight," he said. "After that, he won't be the only one gone." Then he opened the door and vanished into the trees like smoke. Clara stood there, heart pounding, the echo of his voice still in the air. Midnight, that was her deadline. To find Levi, to stop whatever was coming, to survive. Clara stumbled out of the shack, shaking from head to toe. The red scarf was still in her pocket, the only warm thing left on her. Her breath made small clouds in the air as she ran, branches grabbing at her dress, thorns scratching her skin, but she didn't stop. She didn't stop until her legs gave out, and she dropped to her knees beside a stream, gulping in the cold air. She wanted to cry, but she didn't, because crying wouldn't find Levi. Crying wouldn't stop midnight from coming. Suddenly, a light moved through the trees. Clara jumped to her feet, ready to run again, but it wasn't a threat this time. It was a lantern, held by someone small. A boy stepped into view, no older than 10. Freckles across his nose, bare feet, and eyes too old for his face. "I saw you go in there," he said. "You weren't supposed to." Clara stared at him. "Who are you?" "Silas," he said. "I help around the chapel and the graveyard." She swallowed. "You followed me?" He nodded. "I follow everybody. It's how I stay alive." Clara knelt slowly. "Did you see the man who brought me there?" Silas nodded again. "He works for the ones in the mine, the ones who wear clean clothes but got dirty hands." He glanced over his shoulder. "They don't like people asking questions, especially women." Clara took a deep breath. "Do you know where they took Levi?" The boy looked down. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, a silver locket. Clara's breath caught. She opened it. Inside was a picture, a faded sketch of Levi's face, and a tiny strand of dark hair. "He gave me that the day before he disappeared," Silas said. "Said if anything happened to him, someone named Clara would come looking." Clara clutched the locket, her hands trembling. "Do you know where he is?" she whispered. Silas shook his head. "No, but I know where they don't want you to look." He pointed toward the ridge. "There's an old tunnel hidden under the black rocks. The mine says it's closed, but folks say they hear things. Screams. Chains. Hammering when the moon's full." He paused. "People say ghosts. I think it's worse." Clara stood slowly. The locket pressed to her chest. "Will you show me?" The boy hesitated. Then he nodded, and together they disappeared into the trees. Two shadows carrying a flickering light, racing against the hourglass of midnight. The tunnel mouth was hidden behind a wall of black rock and brush, just like Silas had said. It didn't look like much, just a crooked hole in a hill, barely wide enough for two people to stand side by side. But as Clara stared into it, she felt something deep in her chest, like the earth was holding its breath. Silas held the lantern steady beside her. "No one comes here," he whispered. "Not even the sheriff." Clara nodded. "Then this must be the place they want forgotten." She crouched and stepped inside. The tunnel swallowed the light fast. The walls were damp and cold. The air smelled like wet coal and rusted metal. She could hear the steady drip of water, far off, echoing to the dark like a heartbeat. They moved slowly. Old wooden beams held up the low ceiling, cracked and bowed like tired arms. Scraps of tools were scattered along the ground. Broken pickaxes, twisted nails, even an old shoe. Clara's hand brushed the wall and came away red. Not paint, rust, or blood, or both. She didn't ask. Further in, they reached a fork in the path. Silas pointed to the right. "That way ends in collapse," he said. "But left goes to the holding shaft." Clara followed him, her pulse pounding louder with every step. Then she heard it, a noise, faint, metal against metal. She stopped. Silas raised the lantern. The light flickered across the walls, and then onto something that made Clara's heart freeze. Scratch marks, dozens of them, on the stone, like someone had been trying to claw their way out. And just below that, burned into the wood with something hot, were 4 shaky letters. LMC. Levi McCallister. Clara fell to her knees. Her hand brushed the letters, trembling. He had been here, not just passing through. Trapped, held, fighting, and maybe still alive. She stood slowly, a fire rising in her chest. Her fear was still there, but it was smaller now, smaller than her purpose. She looked at Silas. "We have to go deeper." He nodded. "But we have to hurry." Why? Silas looked back the way they came. Because I think someone followed us. And then behind them, the sound of boots on stone. Not one pair. 3. Clara pressed her back against the tunnel wall, heart thudding in her ears. The sound of boots grew louder. Closer. She held her breath. Silas stood beside her, small and still, his eyes locked on the flickering lantern. 3 men. That's what they'd heard. And in a narrow-mined tunnel. There was nowhere to run. Clara's hand brushed the broken pickaxe on the ground. She gripped it tightly. They weren't going to drag her away. Not now. Not after she'd come this far. Not when Levi could be just feet away. Then the first shadow appeared, tall, wide shoulders, dragging a chain behind him. A second figure followed, then a third. But before they could speak, Clara stepped out with the pickaxe raised. Her voice shook, but was loud. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Where is Levi McCallister?" The men stopped, surprised. The one in front stepped closer, sneering. "You should have stayed in Boston, girl." Clara didn't back down. "He's alive, isn't he?" They didn't answer. Silas raised the lantern higher. That's when Clara saw it. Behind the men, part of the wall wasn't stone at all. It was a door, wooden, bolted, and barely held shut by rusted iron. She didn't think. She ran. The men shouted, but she was faster. She slammed the pickaxe into the door. Once, twice, crack. The door burst open, and inside, Levi, chained to the wall, pale, weak, but his eyes open when the light touched his face. He whispered her name. "Clara." She dropped to her knees beside him, sobbing. "I found you," she breathed. "I found you." Behind her, boots thundered closer. But this time, she wasn't alone. A loud crack echoed through the tunnel. One of the men fell back, hit by a rock. Silas stood behind him with a slingshot in hand, shaking but fierce. Clara pulled at the chains. "We need to break these, now." She raised the pickaxe again, and with one final strike, the iron gave way. Levi collapsed into her arms. But there was no time to rest. The last man raised a gun. And then bang! He dropped it, howling, gripping his hand. At the tunnel's mouth stood Mabel, holding a shotgun, eyes blazing. "I told you," she growled. "Don't mess with girls who got fire in their hearts." Midnight was coming fast. But now Clara wasn't running. Now she was fighting back, with the truth in her hands and Levi beside her. The stars had never looked so bright, not even in Boston, where Clara used to stare up at the night sky from her bedroom window and dream of someplace else. Back then, it was just escape she wanted. But now, standing in the clearing at the edge of the ridge, blood on her dress, tears on her cheeks, Levi's hand held tight in hers. She knew it had never been escape she needed. It was truth, and it had led her here. Mabel stood behind them, her shotgun slung over one shoulder, watching the shadows for any sign of more trouble. Silas sat by the fire, bandaging a scratch on his arm, eyes wide and shining. And Levi, he was pale, still weak but alive. They had made it out of the mine, but it hadn't been easy. After breaking his chains, Clara had helped him walk through the tunnels, while Mabel held the men back with a cold, steady aim. Silas had led the way, guiding them through the winding paths by memory alone. Every step Levi took was slow and shaky, but he didn't stop, not with Clara beside him. They'd reached the clearing just as the clock struck 12. Midnight, the hour everything had been building toward. And now they were free, but the fight wasn't over. Clara knelt beside Levi, brushing the dirt from his face. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. He smiled, small, tired, but real. "You didn't. You found me, like you always said you would." Mabel stepped closer. "The sheriff's on his way. Silas ran ahead to town before we came back here. The truth's going to come out, Clara. All of it." Clara looked at her. "Do you think they'll believe me?" Mabel nodded. "They'll believe what they see. And they'll see Levi, alive, hurt, but breathing. And those men, they'll talk once the cuffs go on." Clara stood slowly, staring out at the town below. Lights were starting to glow in windows. People would wake up to news they never expected. That the quiet boy from the blacksmith shop hadn't disappeared. That the mine, so trusted, so important, had been hiding something darker than gold. And that a girl from Boston, with no family name worth anything, had stood up and uncovered it all. She felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not anger, just a kind of peace. Levi sat up, wincing. "Do you still want to marry me?" he asked quietly. Clara laughed, a sound full of exhaustion and wonder. "You're asking me now." He gave her a look. "It's past midnight. I figured I'd waited long enough." Clara didn't answer with words. She leaned in and kissed him softly, her hand on his cheek. It was slow, honest, not perfect, but real. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. Mabel made a small sound behind them. "Well, about time," she muttered. "I'll fetch the preacher myself, if I have to." Silas grinned from where he sat, teeth white against the firelight. "Can I be the best man?" Clara looked around to 3 of them, this strange little family forged in fear and fire. "Yes," she said, "all of you." The wind picked up, soft and cool. And somewhere in the dark, the first morning bird began to sing. The worst was behind them. But the best? That was just beginning. And under the midnight stars, Clara and Levi held each other close. No more letters, no more waiting, just love. If this story moved you, if you believe in Clara's strength and hope for their love to survive, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part touched you the most. More stories like this are waiting, ones with heartbreak, hope, and endings worth staying for. Until next time, thank you for watching.